Hello. Today we're going to look at ways that you can make generative music on a modular. That is to say, music where you set up a set of rules or chance systems in action and you watch as they play themselves out. And they could do this in its entirety. It could be a patch that you just stand back and it just happens, or it could be something that you take inspiration from and you actually interact with yourself. Now, what I am not going to do is I am not going to just wire up a massive patch and attempt to deconstruct it for you, because I think that's confusing and I don't think it's going to be that helpful for you. Instead, what I'm going to do is look at particular types of modules that can be used for the making of generative music and talk about how some specific applications, how those specific things can be used specifically for the creation of randomness and evolving textures and timbres and melodies over time. And then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to put them together in your mind and you'll get an idea of what all of them, imagine all of them working at once, because I just don't think it's going to be helpful to do it as a big car crash. One thing that I'd quite like to bring up before we actually get going is this idea of generative music as cheating. I was talking to a bandmate who said that that sounded like bollocks, basically, as in, if you're just getting the machine to make the music, why don't you just put a CD on? And I do understand what he's saying, but I have a particular feeling about this, which is that I don't think it is cheating, because you make the rules. And more's the point, here's the real point, you get to decide when it's right. As in, as I'm listening to the Turing machine make melodies, I reject 95% of what I hear the Turing machine and I lock the 5% of things that I like, which is to say, perhaps philosophically there's no difference between me having written this little melody that it's playing currently or me just having waited and known that that was the right thing to do. Ultimately, it is your musical taste, which is both a skill and completely unique to you. And as someone much more clever than me said, with all of this type of stuff, the skill is knowing what to keep. So with that in mind, let's play. Element 1, VCAs. Apparently you can never have too many VCAs, or so the saying goes. But what is a VCA? A VCA is a voltage-controlled amplifier. I have a hex VCA here, which is 6 VCAs in one, made by IntelliGel. And there are many, many others. A VCA is basically a way of changing a volume. And that could be a volume of audio that has been sent or of control voltage. And most importantly, is the V. It's a voltage controlled amplifier, so you can use a voltage to change that volume. This is a hugely important element because VCAs are the way that you can avoid static patches. So if you want something to change over time, you need a VCA in order to give yourself that control where it doesn't exist, because otherwise you're patching something directly into something else, and perhaps there's an attenuator so that you can choose how much or how little of that you send, but the difference is that a VCA will let you automate that. So it's a way of creating evolution where you don't otherwise have the ability to do it. Permit me to demonstrate. So here is a tone, which is a Korgasmatron's filter squeaking, so it becomes a sine wave oscillator. Now, there's a really cool thing you can do to create FM by sending the output of one channel into the 1 volt per octave of the other. And if I get this to squeal and that one to squeal, you hear it do it. Creates FM. Unfortunately, it's kind of all or nothing. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a VCA to control that. And so I'll put the output of the that sound, the initial one, sorry, the second one, which makes it go all squonky, through the VCA, and then I'll put the output of the VCA into the, actually we'll put it into the FM input. That probably does make more sense, doesn't it? And then we can use the VCA. You see this? So the VCA will control the sending of it. And I don't want to use my hand to do that. I want to use an LFO to do that. Such is the beauty of the wonderful VCA. So LFO can do it for me. The VCA controls the timbral animation and varies it over time. It's how we're going to turn something that would otherwise be static into an animated performance. And this doesn't have to just be audio. It could be control voltages as well. This is why you can never have too many VCAs. A second really awesome example of VCAs being wicked is to modulate modulation, which is to say, when we're using a random voltage generator, as we are in this instance, to create a melody, because it's creating a random melody, we could actually have that flying all over the keyboard and sending voltages from very low to very high, and creating a massively varied melody. But that isn't the way that melodies tend to be constructed. Melodies occupy what is normally quite a small area of the keyboard, so it's important to constrain the range that is available to your oscillator. But the beauty of the VCA is, of course, we can vary that over time. So what's happening here is that the output of the Turing machine is going through a VCA, as before, and it's coming out and it's going into my quantizer, and then it's going into the filter, which is actually acting as an oscillator. But I've got a second Turing machine, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire that so that it is controlling the VCA, because what will happen is if I increase the voltage, the melody will change. It'll rise on the keyboard. Do you see? And in this way we can introduce long variation, because we're using this as our fundamental melody, and then we're using this as another, like a modifier, which we can change over time. So it's very useful. We can use a second LFO or random voltage source to constrain the range of our first, and to do so over time, changing things over time. And hell, if we had a mixer, perhaps I could have an LFO mixed in with that as well, so you can introduce even more variation over time, changing your melody and the scaling and the recording notes that it will hit on the quantizer just by adjusting the VCA. Yeah, let's keep doing this. Point 2, LFOs. Low frequency oscillators are essential because obviously they'll allow you to change things over time. In this instance, I've got a maths, which is effectively 2 LFOs, and an abstract data octa controller, which can be 8 LFOs, controlling all kinds of stuff happening in the patch. But the predominant thing is just volume, using VCAs. So it's easy to sort of wire up a kind of strange ambient soundscape that elements fade in and out over time. Radio music comes in and goes away. Tones come in from here and go away. Tones from the wavetable VCO come in and go away. And what's nice is that this is not all clocked. So these two elements are not clocked to one another, and although the octave controller can be, it can also not be. And by removing the clock, you reduce the opportunity for convenient repetition. So a non-clocked source can be very valuable. Similarly, depending on what you're trying to do, a clocked one may be too. The other thing that's important is, where possible, to modulate the VCOs. And best of all, to modulate within one another, as in to allow modules that are in the patch to influence one another. Always be thinking about ways that you can make the patch influence itself, because especially with a small amount of modules, you can get some really interesting, deep, complex results, and just from a few elements. The other thing, of course, is whenever you have got an interesting modulation, consider putting a VCA in the path, and you can control the amount of that modulation being sent. Once again, you never have too many VCAs. I would argue you also can never have too many LFOs. Nice. Random voltage generators. As we've seen, they're obviously already a source of musical inspiration. They're the source of random melodies. In this instance, a random voltage generator can be that source of timbral inspiration. While the same melody loops over and over and again, a random voltage generator is subtly adjusting the timbre. So a little bit of randomness can be that extra hand, the invisible hand of God, just adjusting everything just very slightly to keep it interesting over time. And of course, there's all kinds of deeper ways that you can integrate randomness. Put a degree of randomness in the control of big important elements in your patch that affect huge amounts of timbre or melody, and obviously then the hand of God is going to have far more control. Even just used in this way, it can turn something simple into something that can be listened to for quite a long time. Next, the pitch quantizer. Now, what a pitch quantizer does is it takes what would otherwise be a completely unstepped freeform voltage, and it constrains it to a scale. Now, this is very useful because pitch quantizer will allow us to turn anything into a melody. So in this way, we turn a LFO into an arpeggiator. But this is a beautiful thing. This allows us to take what would otherwise be chaos and make it musical. It's important to be careful not to have it just fly around the entire scale, otherwise you get this. And melodies don't sound like that. They occupy small portions of the keyboard usually, so bear that in mind. And what's nice about the intuitive quantizer and things like the ornament and crime allow you to have multiple sources being quantized to the same scale. So if you wanted to have, literally 4 elements that are all musically related to one another, you can pick a common scale, and every element that goes through this will be constrained to that same scale. It totally rules, because it means that you can have lots of disparate elements and make them all cohesive, musical to one another. So if melody is your bag, you need a pitch quantizer. Our next thing to look at are clock dividers. Now, you probably are all too well aware what clock dividers are. They are a module which you put a clock in and you get divisions out. Divisions being the absolute most important thing here, because it allows you to take a fast master clock and from it derive much slower event timings which relate to your master clock. And that's useful because those event timings being slower allow you to have things that happen in the patch later on, but with rhythmic regularity. The key thing in terms of making longer passages here is a clock divider that allows you much longer divisions than traditional ones. Because in this instance, I'm using the 4ms rotating clock divider because what it lets you do is have much longer divisions, and you can engage them on and off, so you can perform the alternating division, and it allows you to rotate the outputs, which is amazing. That is basically jumbling up what the outputs are doing using a voltage. And that's awesome because it means that you can suddenly have a complete change in all of the occurrences, all of the timings of your events. So you can see here, I'm using our friend the VCA and envelope generators to trigger a Acme's Castle, to hear an Acme's Castle, and also to reset a radio music. So what I did was set the RCD to 64 as its max division. And can you see how you're getting a regular flashing input, but we're so seldom getting all of the divisions. And this is awesome because they relate to that master clock, but they're so spread out that we can have things that happen much later in the sequence, but that do happen with rhythmic regularity. Obviously, those things don't have to be short percussive elements. They could be anything. Those could be clocking your random sources. They could also be triggering sounds with very slow attacks, like this. And of course, this is just one set of divisions. Let's use the rotate. So again, what the rotate is going to do is let us effectively remap these on the fly. Suddenly, it's letting in lots more of the sample off the radio music, so you end up with something completely different. And by just changing this offset that I'm feeding to rotate, it will change the sequence again. I don't know what's going to happen. Nice. One exceptionally important thing to point out is, wasn't it fun, this idea of manually shifting the rotate point? What you then should do is use a random source to do that. So if you put a random source into the rotate, you'll end up with a jumbling of your sequences that could perhaps never repeat. The logical conclusion to all of this is having a clock divider control multiple events occurring. And in this instance, we have randomness clocked in time with the clock divider as well. To come back to this idea of adding in an invisible hand. And then let's try using that randomness source to control our rotations for us. I don't know what's going to happen. Ooh. It's just this side of musical. So in using this random source to control the rotations, we ensure that the sequence never quite repeats the same way each time. And then you want to just make sure you record the damn output, because every now and then it'll do something completely amazing and you're like, I can't make it do that again. Shit. Ace. Next up, sequential switches. Now, we've looked at the DUT for A151 sequential switch before, and there are other sequential switches on the market, of course. What a sequential switch does is it allows you to use a trigger event to basically remap sources to destinations or destinations to sources. It's like a signal switch box. Imagine a railway station where you can click a button and send trains in different directions, or if you're receiving trains from multiple places, allow them to all come into one place that you decide. So you can suddenly be sending something here, then you can be sending it there, then you can be sending it there. Or if you have things from multiple destinations, you can send them, you can switch the sources. And that's what I'm going to do here. So if you listen to this, that is the output of the pressure points. That's it there, coming in here, and then it's being sent. This is actually an output in this instance, and that's going to my quantizer. The usefulness for us making patches that kind of self-play and that extend over time is the fact that you then, you can pick another input. So you can jumble up this melody, and even just this sort of boring old 4-note melody then becomes more interesting because there's another element at play. Can you see up here, perhaps, I have a rotating clock divider again, and then that fourth division I'm going to use to adjust the sequential switch, comme ça. And this second input here is actually the random output of a Turing machine. So it plays regularly, plays this regular sequence, lets it through then, and then it plays a random source. So you hear how it doesn't quite repeat because we've asked randomness to play a part and jumble up the process. We could take all of the principles that we were playing around with before, like rotating, so that you could have a rotated input to the trigger, and then you'd end up with something that it wasn't regular like this, it would change, you know. Let's try that. I mean, that could be cool. It's quite a loose melody, so you might not hear it. You get a longer change there if I turn it. Another example is just this idea of signal routing. God, I mean, you could have like a really interesting sample and hold source coming in here, and then you could have 4 different places that you send it to and use switching to determine when that happens. So you'd have this sort of source of jiggly randomness that would fly around, affect one thing, then it would affect another thing, then it would affect another thing. And you could have the, you know, quite a random trigger source so that that sending was completely odd. And not regimented in any way. You'd end up with a patch that was sort of like this invisible hand jumping around at all times, messing with things. Thanks, sequential switch. Finally, we should look a little at logic. So logic modules allow you to take triggers from various places, multiple triggers, and combine them to create new interesting trigger rhythms based on those inputs. And they have all of these multiple types of logic which determine how they are combined. If you have a look at truth tables, it will hurt your head. I guess what I would like to highlight is AND, because it means that you can take one source that's producing 16ths perhaps, and then put in a random source, and it will only allow an output to occur if both of them are high at the same time, which is to say that your regular source kind of quantizes your random one. And what I'm going to do here is just play around a little bit with some percussion. So you can hear this bass drum and this hat are not being generated by the Plog. Those are just being coming off a clock divider, but that I am combining some of the other divisions through. That's this one, which is this and this source being combined with OR. So can you hear how, you know, from what are just regular divisions of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we're getting quite an interesting rhythmic kind of offbeat thing. Now let's add in the snare, which is coming off this channel. And that is also being generated with OR logic. I am certainly not clever enough to be able to tell you that you know necessarily that a particular logic type is going to work for you. I don't think it's necessarily important to know what they are. The key is to experiment. So if I change the logic type, let's put it to AND. They just result in different things. So a logic module is just an awesome thing to have in your arsenal because it allows you to extend existing gate sources and existing clock generators and stuff to make interesting rhythms. And once again, just to highlight AND as an excellent example because it's this quantization concept that is super useful. Yeah. I find it is key to keep the bass drum regular, and then you can get away with murder with the rest. Let's add in another clock source. Oh. And a wonderful thing about the Plog is the jumbling aspect. So let's clock our a randomness source. Because as you can see, the Turing machine is just not useful. I hardly ever use it. And let's stick it into here. Ooh. So you can see that the Turing machine is now changing the logic for us on the fly, which has the effect of jumbling up our beat. And again, if you are trying to make things that don't quite repeat the same way each time, it's just freaking wonderful to have randomness, the hand of God, in your patch at all times. Let's do it for this as well. Logic beats. I just want about 5 more of these, actually, that'd be really nice. Yeah. Ace. So that is just a whistle-stop tour of some of the elements that can be useful in the creation of generative music on a modular. And I hope that will inspire you to put these things together and discover new ways to jumble up your shit. I would like particularly to encourage you to comment and to discuss strategies for generative music yourself, and let's get a conversation going. I particularly want to thank the people that you currently see on screen for their invaluable advice on generative music. You're fucking awesome and you're much better at it than I am. And particular thanks to Nick for sending the Plog. You're awesome. Thank you for that. Please sponsor me on Patreon if you don't already. It helps me make these videos and I love you dearly for it. That's all. I'll see you next time. All right, mate. See you. Bye.